Well, here we are for our Chapter 8 review. It is hard to believe that we have reached this point of the semester. But let me tell you, God has been good and you have worked very hard. So here we are for Chapter 8. Pardon me for just a moment. That's refreshing. Anyway, Chapter 8 review. This will be short. It won't be anything like the videos that I sent you during choir tour. You need to know that first inversion triads come about by arpeggiation. And when you see a bass arpeggiation, something like this, or we don't take the time to analyze all the parts of that triad. Like there's root position, there's first inversion, there's second inversion, so we wouldn't go 1, 1, 6, 1, 6, 4. The whole thing is 1, and you can find that on page 115. So we do see first inversion triads coming about by arpeggiation. That's part of life. We made a big deal about talking about the 3 reasons why tonal composers would substitute a first inversion triad for their root position counterparts. The first is, here's my red pen, by the way, I feel very close to this. The first reason that they would substitute a first inversion triad would be to improve the contour of the bass line. And I think you could see that on the very first page of Chapter 8. I forget who played those 2 examples for us in class, but the second one was better. The contour was much better and much more singable. The second reason tonal composers would substitute a first inversion triad would be to provide a greater variety of pitches for the bass line. And then finally, the third reason tonal composers used first inversion triads was to lessen the weight of the 5-to-1 cadence. And if 5-to-1 if they're not both in root position, the piece sounds not quite over yet. And that might be your goal as a composer in the middle of the piece. You might not want the piece to sound over. So if you don't, invert one chord or the other, the 5 or the 1. So you need to know those 3 reasons. Now, there was one triad that was found exclusively in first inversion. It was almost never written in root position, and that was the diminished triad. On page 117 in your book, you'll find the diminished triad. The way it's voiced in first inversion was the most pleasing sounding arrangement of the 3 situations. They didn't like the root position because of the F sharp to C on the outsides, that diminished fifth. They didn't like that. They also didn't like the second inversion setup where you had that augmented fourth there in the bottom. They didn't care for that sound either. So this was the voicing that they liked, the first inversion with the major 6 on the outside. That was much more pleasing to their ear. Still a diminished triad, but just voiced differently in first inversion, and that seems to be the one they liked. And then the author made a point of saying that there was a chord in a situation that you couldn't just throw into first inversion, and that was the 6th chord in the deceptive cadence. So if we come through a little cadence such as this, we expect that 6th chord to be in root position, to be a true deceptive cadence. But if you put it in first inversion, you get that here's the same cadence again. Now I'll put it in first inversion. It sounds like a mistake. You have that A thrown up there into the chord. Okay? And so that isn't a true deceptive cadence. There it is in root position. Here it is inverted. And that sounds like a mistake. So when you go 5 to 6, you can't invert the 6th chord. It ruins the deceptive cadence effect. That can be found at the bottom of 117. Make sure you know that. Then we covered inversions in lead sheet briefly, and they're also called slash chords. It's not the fact that you put a slash there and you put the note that the chord is built on. I don't think that was a new concept for our class, and it seemed that you had that idea down pretty well. The thing that you need to brush up on is lead sheets in general. I would strongly suggest you go back in your text a couple of chapters and dust off lead sheets. I saw lowercase letters up in lead sheet land on some of these homework assignments in this chapter, and they didn't use lowercase letters. If you wanted to say F minor, it was capital F, little m, okay, for minor. If you wanted to say F diminished, it was capital F and then the circle, or capital F dim. So go back to the lead sheets and make sure you dust those off. It impressed me, at least your homework did, that lead sheets are very rusty for this class. So yes, we use slash chords when we are trying to show an inversion with lead sheet. Okay, that's important that you know that concept. But equally important is that you get the right lead sheet symbol there. So go back and dust those off. The next concept that was covered in class was the idea of parallel 6 chords. I had you look for them, and the telltale sign was a whole string of chords, all used in first inversion, and those Roman numerals are not functioning traditionally. For instance, we found a sequence or a link. We called it a parallel 6 chord link or a passage, and we found it going 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. That is not how chords progress. You know that. So when you find a selection of Roman numerals functioning atypically, and you find that they're all in first inversion, then you have truly found the passage of parallel 6 chords. And to indicate that they're not functioning normally, it is proper. In fact, I want you to do this. I want you to put parenthesis around that passage. And that theoretically tells the world, okay, I know this passage is not functioning normally, and so I'm putting parenthesis around it. Then we got into a discussion of part writing with 4-part textures in first inversion. If we're in a contrapuntal setting, a fugue or a canon, we double that which leads to the best voice leading. If we're writing homophonically in a homophonic setting, like a hymn texture, which is pretty much what we do in our part writing for now in class, we double that which gives the best sound or the most pleasing sonority, I think the author says. And then finally, in 4-part textures with first inversion triads, we never double the leading tone because of the implied parallel octaves or the definite parallel octaves if you resolve them both up by step. So you never double the leading tone. The author then gave you on page 121 a little chart on how tonal composers generally doubled, what they doubled. The most common doubling was an inner voice doubling with the soprano. And so the least common was inner voices doubling with themselves, tenors doubling altos, that kind of thing. Let's see. He then took 3 or 4 pages to discuss the importance of the outer voices, the soprano and bass parts. And in the tonal era, and since the tonal era, the greatest contrapuntal interest is found in the outer voices, the soprano and the bass. Remember I told you they either attract one another or they repel one another like magnets. They never run parallel to one another. That's when you get into trouble, when your voices run parallel. If they are repelling or attracting one another, that's a great way to write your outer voices. So he does give us some very good horse sense here. When you do your part writing examples, it is best to write the outer parts first and make sure you have good counterpoint in those outer parts. Make sure they are moving in contrary motion or attracting one another, not moving in parallel motion. So I would suggest that you reread chapter 8. There were probably some self-test examples that are left undone, And you could probably do those again as you brush up for this upcoming quiz on Monday. By way of reminder, we will have a quiz on Monday, and we will have our Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 test on Wednesday. I don't normally like to back them up back to back, but as I promised, I will have those graded for you, and I'll be in the room early on Wednesday, the test day, so that you can have 10-15 minutes to look over your quiz and find out any things that you may have messed up on that quiz, so you can do better on the upcoming test. All right, have a great Friday. Enjoy your time off, the hour off, and study hard for the quiz on Monday. We'll see you then.